The city was alive that evening. Neon lights glowed against the glass of skyscrapers, cars rushed past in endless streams, and laughter floated through the air from crowded sidewalks. Inside one of the most expensive restaurants in the heart of the city, a group of young women sat at a table polished to perfection. Their dresses shimmered under golden chandeliers, their perfumes blended in the air, and their voices carried the arrogance of privilege. Among them sat a girl who did not laugh as easily. She was beautiful in the quiet way that draws eyes without effort, the daughter of a millionaire, raised in comfort, yet her eyes betrayed a story that did not match her surroundings. Her friends leaned in close, flashing diamonds on their fingers and the glow of their phones. One after another, they showed off pictures of their boyfriends, fiancés, and husbands. Each photograph was a competition: private jets, luxury cars, vacations on islands where only the powerful could tread. The girl smiled faintly, but inside her chest was a heaviness she could not hide. She had no picture to show. No hand to boast about. Months earlier, her world had shifted. Her boyfriend, once the center of her life, had left her. Not because of love lost, but because he had found someone wealthier, someone whose family could offer him more than hers. The wound was still fresh, and tonight, it burned sharper as laughter filled the table. One of her friends leaned across the table, her tone coated with false sweetness. "And what about you? Where's your man? Surely you have someone to show us." The others joined in, their voices like little knives hidden behind painted smiles. The girl's throat tightened. She could not admit the truth, not here, not before them. She could not confess that love had abandoned her for money. Pride, mixed with desperation, forced her tongue to move. "He's on his way," she said, her voice steady though her heart trembled. "You'll meet him soon." The words slipped out like a lifeline, but they only tangled her deeper. Her friends raised their brows, exchanging knowing looks. The air grew heavier with curiosity. She had made a promise without meaning to. The girl turned her eyes toward the wide glass window beside her. Outside, the night glimmered with motion. Cars stopped and started at the intersection, and people passed by in hurried steps. Then her gaze caught on a man stepping out of a gleaming car parked near the entrance. He was tall, dressed in an expensive suit, with the kind of presence that turned heads. His watch glimmered under the streetlights, his stride confident, his look commanding. Her heart leaped. Perhaps fate was offering her a way out. Perhaps she could ask him, just for a moment, to pretend. She imagined the relief of walking him to the table, the silence of her mocking friends, the power of her lie turning into victory. Her lips curved into a nervous smile, and before she could stop herself, she whispered, loud enough for them all to hear. "The next person who walks in, will be my future husband." The girls laughed, mocking her bold declaration, waiting for her embarrassment. But her eyes stayed fixed on the door. She believed it would be the man she saw outside, the one whose wealth shone like armor. And then, the door opened. But it was not the man she had expected. Instead, a tall black man stepped through the doorway. His presence filled the room, not with wealth displayed, but with a quiet strength that made time slow. He walked with calm confidence, his shoulders broad, his expression unreadable, his skin catching the soft glow of the restaurant lights. For a moment, the entire table froze. The laughter stopped. The promise she had made hung in the air like a chain around her neck. She could not take her words back now. The next person had walked in. And time had stopped. The air in the restaurant shifted the moment he stepped through the door. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was powerful, the kind of stillness that steals every word from the room. The waiters paused mid-step, the chandeliers flickered in quiet reflection, and for the girl sitting at the table, her heart thundered louder than the laughter that had filled her ears moments earlier. Her friends leaned back in their chairs, their lips curling into smirks sharp enough to cut. They thought they had won. They thought her bold words were about to collapse under the weight of their ridicule. The millionaire's daughter had made a promise that could not be undone. The next person to walk in would be her future husband. But fate, cruel and beautiful, had sent in someone they never expected. He was not dressed in the glimmer of wealth. He did not carry the arrogance of money. He was tall, dark-skinned, and carried himself with a strength that came from within. His stride was steady, his eyes calm, his presence undeniable. Yet in the twisted eyes of her friends, he was not the man they imagined when she made her daring claim. Their laughter returned, softer at first, then louder, growing into a cruel chorus that echoed through the polished walls of the restaurant. "Is this your prince?" one of them whispered under her breath, her voice dripping with venom. Another covered her mouth as if hiding her laughter, though the mockery in her eyes was unmasked. The girl's cheeks burned. She wanted to sink into the floor, to disappear into the shadows. But she could not run, not after declaring her promise. Not after pride had chained her to this moment. Her breath caught in her throat as she rose from her chair, each step toward him feeling like a march to her own execution. She met him just inside the doorway, her voice trembling, yet desperate. "I'm sorry. I need your help," she whispered, her words hidden beneath the noise of the restaurant. "Please, just pretend, for a moment. I told them you're my man." The stranger's eyes flickered with surprise, but he did not mock her, he did not turn away. He simply studied her face, as though weighing the truth that trembled in her eyes. Then, with a quiet nod, he agreed. He followed her to the table, his presence towering over the group of women who stared with disbelief and cruel delight. The girl sat beside him, forcing her shaking hands to still, while he remained calm, his silence unshaken by the whispers that filled the air. Her friends leaned in close, their voices sharp, their laughter biting. They whispered about his skin, about his place in the room, about how ridiculous her claim had been. Every word was meant to wound, every chuckle meant to humiliate. And though their cruelty burned her, the man beside her sat with a dignity that no insult could reach. He said nothing. He did not rise to their bait. He simply existed, proud, unbothered, and unshaken. His silence was not weakness. It was power. But silence can only last so long. The cruelty was no longer aimed at him, it turned toward her. They mocked her desperation, her loneliness, her need to create a lie just to keep up with them. They laughed at her broken heart, at the wound she tried to hide, at the pride that brought her to this moment. Their words tore deeper than knives. And it was then, as their laughter grew too loud, that the man finally moved. His chair scraped against the polished floor as he stood, towering over the table. The room seemed to shrink beneath his height, his presence, his strength. His voice, when it came, was steady, not loud, not angry, but filled with a power that silenced every sneer. He defended her. Not with arrogance, not with violence, but with words sharp and true. He reminded them of respect, of dignity, of humanity. He spoke as though the ground beneath him belonged to him, as though their cruelty could never break him. And in that moment, the girl saw something she had never seen before. Not wealth. Not luxury. Not shallow status. But protection. Strength. A man who would stand for her when the world turned cruel. And her heart, still tender from betrayal, felt something it had never felt before. It felt safe. Her friends' laughter faltered, their smiles fading as his words cut through the air. The weight of his presence silenced them one by one. And she, sitting beside him, realized that her dangerous promise had not ruined her. It had led her to something she never knew she was searching for. But destiny was not finished yet. The night still held secrets, secrets that would shatter every assumption in that room, and prove that the man they mocked carried more power than any of them could imagine. The room felt colder now, though the chandeliers still burned golden overhead. The laughter that once filled the air had thinned, replaced by uneasy silence and hidden glares. The women at the table shifted in their seats, their pride wounded, their arrogance shaken by the words of the man they thought unworthy. He sat back down beside her, calm and composed, as if nothing had happened. His broad shoulders carried no tension, his hands rested easily on the table, and his eyes scanned the room with quiet awareness. He did not need to raise his voice again. His presence was enough. But the friends could not accept defeat. Pride would not allow them to. One leaned in, her smile sharp like broken glass. "So this is the man you've been waiting for?" she asked, her tone heavy with sarcasm. "Your future husband?" The others chuckled softly, their voices rising in cruel harmony. They could not see him for who he was. They could only see the surface, the color of his skin, the simplicity of his demeanor, the absence of the wealth they worshipped. In their eyes, he was invisible, unworthy of respect, a joke born out of her desperation. The girl lowered her eyes, shame burning through her. Her lie had trapped her in this moment, and now every second felt like an eternity. But when she dared to glance at him, she saw no shame in his face. He met their cruelty with a stillness that unnerved them. His calm was not silence born of fear. It was the silence of a man who had faced the world's judgment before, and survived it. He did not need to prove himself to them. He did not need their approval. His dignity was not for sale, and in that quiet defiance, he stood taller than any of their mocking words. The girl felt something shift within her. She had wanted a man to shield her from humiliation, someone who could silence the cruelty of her so-called friends. Yet she realized now that she had found something far greater. She had found strength that did not need to be flaunted. A presence that did not crumble under mockery. A man who could make her feel protected, not because of wealth, but because of character. But her friends were relentless. They whispered cruel jokes, tossing glances at his skin, laughing at his supposed lack of place in their golden circle. Their voices grew louder, braver, feeding off each other's arrogance. It was not enough for them to wound her pride, they wanted to humiliate him too. Still, he sat unmoved. A storm of insults swirled around him, yet he was like a mountain in its path, unshaken and unmoved. His eyes held something deeper, something they could not understand, patience, wisdom, power hidden beneath simplicity. The girl's heart ached. She wanted to scream at them, to defend him, to silence their venom. But before she could find her voice, he shifted slightly, leaning forward with a calm strength that drew every eye back to him. His words were few, but they carried weight. He reminded them of respect, how easy it was to mock, but how empty their laughter truly was. He did not raise his tone, he did not need to. Every syllable was like stone on glass, breaking the fragile pride of those who had never been challenged before. The table fell silent once again, their cruelty stripped bare. And in that silence, the girl's heart raced, not with fear this time, but with something entirely different. Admiration. A pull she could not resist. For the first time since her heart had been broken, she felt the fragile spark of something new. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't status. It wasn't the approval of others. It was the strength of a man who could stand in the fire of humiliation and not be consumed. The girls exchanged uneasy glances now, their laughter faltering, though their pride would not allow them to admit defeat. They would not let this moment pass without another attempt to tear her down. But destiny was already at work. The night was moving toward something far greater than their shallow cruelty. Something none of them could have predicted. For soon, the sound of laughter would be replaced by the sound of ringing phones. And when that moment came, the world inside that restaurant would turn upside down. The weight of silence lingered around the table. The women's laughter had faltered, their pride bruised by the stranger's calm defiance. Yet arrogance is a stubborn fire, it refuses to burn out easily. They leaned back in their chairs, their eyes cold and cutting, searching for new ways to wound. The girl sat in the middle of it all, her heart torn between fear and a strange, newfound courage. Just hours ago, she had come here carrying the heaviness of heartbreak, the emptiness left by the man who abandoned her for wealth. She had only wanted to protect her pride, to silence the cruel judgment of her friends. That was why she had spoken those reckless words. The next person who walks in will be my future husband. She had thought it a shield. A clever escape from humiliation. Instead, fate had written those words in stone and brought this man into her life. A stranger. A black man whose very presence stirred the cruelty of her friends and revealed the ugliness of their hearts. And yet, sitting beside him, she felt something she had never felt with anyone before. Safety. Her friends whispered again, their voices dripping with mockery. Is this really the man you chose? Out of all the city, this is your future husband? They laughed, shaking their heads, their jeweled earrings catching the golden light. But when she looked at him, expecting to see anger or shame, she found none. His face was calm, steady, his jaw strong but relaxed. He did not flinch under their gaze. He did not retreat. He was as immovable as a stone set against a raging tide. And for the first time, she felt her pride returning, not the fragile, hollow pride that came from appearances and wealth, but a deeper kind, born of truth. Without thinking, she straightened in her chair. She no longer hid behind him, no longer wished to escape the lie she had spoken. Instead, she chose to embrace it. Yes, she said softly, her voice trembling at first, but growing steadier with each word. Yes, this is the man I chose. The table erupted in laughter, sharp and cruel. They mocked her openly now, their voices filling the restaurant with venom disguised as amusement. A few heads turned from other tables, curious eyes glancing at the scene unfolding. But she no longer cared. Their laughter no longer pierced her. She felt shielded by the quiet strength sitting beside her. The man did not speak. He did not need to. His silence was a fortress. His presence was enough. And though they sat as strangers just minutes before, in that moment, they shared something unspoken. A pact. An understanding. He had chosen to help her when he could have turned away. She had chosen to stand by him when the world mocked them both. It was a bond not built on wealth or convenience, but on courage in the face of cruelty. Her friends sneered, their arrogance rising like smoke. They could not understand it, and what they could not understand, they despised. Their laughter grew louder, desperate to bury the unease creeping into their hearts. For though they mocked, there was something about this man that unsettled them. It was not his wealth, because they saw none. It was not his status, because they assumed he had none. It was his power. The kind of power that did not bow, did not crumble, did not break. The girl felt her chest tighten, her heart pounding with something she had not expected to feel tonight. Admiration. Respect. And beneath it, something deeper, something dangerous. The spark of love. But she dared not name it yet. Instead, she lifted her chin and faced her friends, her voice steady. Laugh if you want. Mock if you must. But this man is mine. The restaurant grew quiet. Her words cut through the noise sharper than any insult. For the first time, her friends stared at her not with superiority, but with disbelief. They had never seen her stand so firmly. The man glanced at her, his expression unreadable, but in his eyes there was a flicker of something, approval, perhaps, or gratitude. And in that silence, the pact between them was sealed. What began as a desperate lie was becoming something far greater. Neither of them knew that destiny was still weaving its threads, preparing a revelation that would not only humble her friends but also change her life forever. For the night was not done. And soon, the sound of ringing phones would shatter every illusion in that room. The laughter returned, sharper now, desperate in its cruelty. The women at the table leaned closer to one another, whispering and snickering, their words floating just loud enough for her to hear. Their jewelry sparkled under the golden light, but their hearts gleamed with arrogance darker than any shadow. She had expected them to grow quiet after her stand, but pride is a dangerous hunger. It feeds on the humiliation of others, and it was clear that they would not be satisfied until she was broken completely. They began to turn their venom not just on him, but on her. "So this is who you choose now," one sneered, her lips curling into a smirk. "Not good enough to keep the man you had, so you pretend this one belongs to you?" Another shook her head, laughing. "Desperation has a smell, darling. And tonight, it's all over you." The table erupted again, cruel voices bouncing off polished walls. A few diners nearby turned their heads, their brows furrowing at the scene, but none spoke. The girl felt her face flush with heat. Their laughter felt like knives, cutting deeper with every sound. She lowered her gaze, her pride trembling under the weight of their judgment. But then, she felt it. The presence beside her. He had not moved. He had not flinched. He sat like a stone against the storm, his silence so powerful it seemed to absorb their cruelty and return nothing in response. For a moment, she thought he would remain silent forever. But when their words turned from her choices to her worth as a woman, something in him shifted. The scrape of his chair against the marble floor silenced the room. Slowly, he rose to his full height, and the table seemed to shrink beneath his shadow. He did not slam his fist, he did not shout, yet every eye in the restaurant turned toward him. There was authority in his posture, command in his silence, power in the very air around him. When he spoke, his voice was calm, deep, and steady, but each word carried like thunder. "You laugh because it is easy. You mock because it costs you nothing. But remember, mockery is the weapon of the weak. And weakness always reveals itself in cruelty." The laughter died instantly. Their eyes widened, not with respect, but with unease. They shifted in their seats, their pride shrinking in the presence of a man who had nothing to prove, yet spoke with the weight of truth itself. He turned his gaze upon them, not with anger, not with hate, but with a steady calm that stripped their arrogance bare. "You measure worth by money, by skin, by what sparkles under the light. But true worth is measured in how one treats those who cannot give them anything in return. Tonight, you have revealed yourselves. And it is not beauty, nor wealth, nor strength I see." His words struck harder than any insult could. They sat frozen, their smirks gone, their confidence faltering. No one dared to laugh now. The girl stared up at him, her heart pounding. She had never been defended like this before. The men she had known flaunted their wealth, their cars, their businesses, but none had ever stood for her like this. None had ever silenced cruelty with such calm authority. In that moment, her heart shifted. The admiration she had felt earlier deepened, transforming into something undeniable. She saw him not as the stranger who walked in by chance, not as the man she had chosen in desperation to uphold a lie, but as someone she could trust. Someone she could love. Her friends sat silent, their pride cracked, their power diminished. For the first time that evening, she did not feel small beneath their gaze. She felt strong, because he had stood for her, when no one else would. And though the night was not finished, though destiny still had secrets to reveal, she knew one truth had already been written. This man, whom she had never known before tonight, was no accident. He was the answer to a promise she had spoken without thinking. "The next person who walks in will be my future husband." And though her lips had spoken it in pride, her heart was beginning to believe it in truth. But fate was not yet done with its work. For as the room settled into uneasy silence, a new sound began to rise, soft at first, then growing louder, more insistent. The sharp, sudden ringing of phones. One by one, her friends reached into their purses, their eyes dropping to glowing screens. And as they read the messages flashing before them, the color drained from their faces. The night was about to turn. The restaurant grew silent, yet beneath that silence a storm raged in every heart. The girls who once sat with smug faces, flashing diamond rings and glossy photos, now sat trembling. The once untouchable titles of Mrs. So-and-so, fiancée of the banker, girlfriend of the lawyer, had crumbled like glass beneath a hammer. The notifications on their phones were not random misfortunes. They were unravelings, proof that the lives they flaunted were built on sand. But to Chloe, none of that mattered anymore. Her eyes were fixed on the man beside her. He was not who she had imagined. When she uttered that reckless line, "The next person to walk in will be my future husband." He was not the polished white millionaire she thought would walk through those doors. No, he was far more. He was the unexpected, the unplanned, the humbling truth wrapped in a man who carried himself with quiet strength. Darius. He had stood by her when the world turned cruel. He had defended her when others laughed. He had seen her, not as an accessory, not as a fragile girl living off her father's wealth, but as a woman worth protecting. As the whispers of disbelief spread across the room, Darius turned to her, not for the audience, not for the approval of anyone else, but only for her. His voice was low, calm, and steady, yet it carried the weight of every promise she had ever wanted to hear. "Chloe," he said, "life has a way of revealing truths when we least expect them. Tonight, you stood with me, even when it meant being ridiculed. That means more than you realize. I won't lie, when I walked in here, I didn't expect to meet the woman who'd change my life. But now, looking at you, I don't want to walk away." Her breath caught in her throat. Tears blurred her vision as his words sank into her soul. The same friends who mocked now sat in stunned silence. The women who once laughed were now witnessing something that could not be bought with money, jewelry, or fancy cars. This was real. Then came the revelation that shook them all. A manager, dressed in sharp black attire, hurried into the restaurant and whispered something in the ear of the hostess. A murmur spread among the staff. Then the manager walked straight to Darius, bowing his head with respect. "Sir," he said, "your father's office just called. They said to inform you immediately that your presence is not required tonight. Everything is already being handled." Mr. Harrington. The name hung in the air like thunder. The richest man in the city. The empire builder. The mogul whose name was etched on skyscrapers and engraved into the fabric of the city itself. And this man, this calm, unassuming man, was his son. The room shifted. Some gasped. Some whispered. Some simply stared in disbelief. Darius looked back at Chloe, unfazed by the weight of his identity now laid bare. "It doesn't matter who my father is," he said softly. "What matters is this moment. You. Me. And what we could become together." Chloe's heart trembled. For the first time in her life, she wasn't thinking about money, appearances, or her friends' judgments. She thought about the man before her, the protector, the truth-teller, the one who made her feel safe and seen. Her voice quivered, but it carried the conviction of her heart. "Yes, Darius. I don't care about who your father is. I care about who you are. And I want this. I want us." A hush fell. The girls who once mocked her sat powerless, stripped of their arrogance. They had chased men with titles and wallets. But Chloe had found something far greater, love that could not be bought, a bond forged in truth. And then, in front of them all, Darius took her hand. His strong fingers intertwined with hers as he asked, steady and unshaken, "Chloe, will you give me the honor of being your future, not just for tonight, but for always?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded. "Yes." The restaurant erupted, not in applause, but in the silent awe of watching something rare. A love story born not of convenience, not of wealth, not of appearances, but of courage, loyalty, and the unexpected beauty of fate. Outside, the city lights shimmered like 1,000 blessings, as if the universe itself had stopped to witness the moment. Chloe had spoken recklessly, never knowing her words would become prophecy. "The next person to walk in will be my future husband." And so it was. Not the man she expected. But the man she was meant for.